So my assumption is this is a typo. But even if it's not. Is annual peasant hunt. If Donald Trump Jr. defends the Second Amendment as well as he shoots, we'll have nothing to worry about.
Wait, that's not Stephen King in the horror.
No, it's Steve King. I'm pretty sure that's fantastic. I assume he means pheasant.
Well, look at them all hanging, crying.
Yeah,
Yes.
but just the idea that if he defends the Second Amendment as well as he shoots, those peasants won't cause us any. Oops. Exactly. I thought that was funny. That was one of my favorites all week. That was my favorite week because you know, if you're a congressman or I don't know, president, maybe have someone spell check your tweets, help you with grammar, syntax, sentence design, punctuation. I don't know, the other things. Someone should stop old Steve from letting that one get out. Hey, whoa, peasant hunting is bad. It's been frowned upon for years now.
What if we go over to England?
That's right, absolutely. We are no longer a despotism, so this is not a despot system, so let's not shoot the peasants. And, you know, pretty outstanding. Anyway, all right, so last week we finished with this, as so too at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace, and if by grace can't be based on works, and if it were, grace would no longer be grace or necessary. The point of last week was to remind everybody that, listen, there's an army, you know, there's a group of people who are part of this chosen grace, who are part of this chosen opportunity, you know, that just, you know, are the right people within the congregation. I'm not talking about pastors, I'm not talking about theologians, I'm not talking about evangelists, but the right people within the group to lead. Anyway, I want to skip by that. So we're going to talk just for a few minutes. We're going to transition pretty greatly, I think, next week to some different kind of thoughts away from the book of Romans. The following argument is this, that what we're going to read, is that the Jews are flawed, but with them we can be perfect. Okay? The following argument that Paul's about to make needs this context. And the reason it needs this context is because he's been slamming them pretty good. The problem is that when you go to slam, you know, when you go to make a point, it's human nature to take that point too far. It's human nature to start to think that if I don't like such and such mentality, then it means that I don't like those people. One of my favorite conversations that Gabe and I used to have in college was, you can hate the name on the front but not the name on the back. You know, if you hate the Dodgers, for example, it's okay to hate the Dodgers, but you don't hate Puig. You know, you don't hate the person. You can hate the team, but don't hate the person. And so we used to have this conversation all the time, because a lot of people say, oh, I hate the Dodgers, or I hate the Giants, or I hate the whatever. Nobody hates the Eagles, but you know, I hate. Well, except that sometimes that hate goes past what really is sort of the philosophical object, and it becomes about people. And Paul has been talking a lot about how God has elevated the Gentiles, God has pushed the Gentiles to a new level, God has given the Gentiles all of this stuff. And the Jews have refused it, And so I think at this point Paul has been trying to make sure that everybody understands that while you can understand the truth of what he's teaching, don't start to hate on anybody. And so he says this at the beginning. He says, and again I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? So he's talking about the Jews. Remember we talked last week about you know, Elijah. We talked about all those things. And he says, did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? I think a lot of us go through that when we make mistakes. You know, is my mistake so bad that I can't recover from it? Is my stumble so bad that I can never get back up again? is my, whatever. And so he says, well, not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. That is the ultimate glass half full, right? The Jews stumbled so badly. Congratulations, Gentiles, you now have salvation. The Jews fell so far that God has transitioned that birthright, basically, to the Gentiles. And he says, but if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater will their full inclusion bring? So at this point he says, listen, we're talking about a collection of riches. How much more powerful would it be if we had Jew and Gentile alike, as opposed to just Gentile? How much greater is it that it's no longer just Jew? And so he says, listen, if we can bring these two things together, how much greater would all of this be? Now that might seem like a pretty obvious concept to us. Well, of course, if everybody got saved, the world would be a happier place. Except I want to take this mentality way beyond Jew and Gentile. Okay? But we get this point where he says, listen, how much greater would it be? Thomas Paine said, he that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from oppression. For if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will ultimately reach himself. And this is, never truer words spoken applicable till now. Is that when we don't look out for the oppression of others, when we don't look out for our enemies, sooner or later what they are suffering will be our suffering. And it's a hard fact to embrace sometimes. And I'm going to explain why I think we embrace it. Why I think we stumble into this. Is that we sort of set up this mentality of enemies. We set up this mentality that people are in the wrong and we're in the right. People who disagree with us are wrong. People who are different than us are wrong. People who see the world differently than us are weird. We were talking about the kids the other night. We had our last football practice with the bobbleheads Thursday night, and of course, we get our team mom does this great job. She goes out and she gets tons of ice cream sundae stuff to do at the end of practice. Okay. Then another mom rolls in with these like decadent cupcakes to celebrate her own birthday. Right? I'm not lying, right? It's a little weird. Super great cupcakes though. And so you got these moms, there's cookies, right? So these little bobbleheads, which are 6, 7, 8-year-old dudes, right? Who already have enough energy to power the world if we can figure out how to plug them in,
yes.
right?
Yes.
They're running all over the place. Well, so the moms start bringing this stuff out and putting it on the table. About 7:15. Practice doesn't end until 8, right?
Oh.
So practice ended at 7:15, right? Because the kids are like, is that ice cream? I'm like, football. There's ice cream over there. Right? Let's huddle up. Okay, we're gonna run buck right. Kids huddle up. There's ice cream over there. Did you guys see the ice cream? Buck right. Kids are like, there's ice cream. And it's like so I think I had to practice about 7:20. And so the kids go over. And I mean all the team moms did a great job. They're like slathering this stuff, they got sprinkles, gummy worms. Right? Because nothing says chocolate sundae like gummy worms. Right? And they're just pouring this stuff in. I mean, these bowls are huge, right? These kids are, you want a cupcake? You want a cookie? And like these kids are zing, right? Because they have a full practice, so they got tons of energy anyway. And but they're just, they're stoked. And my assistant coach walks over to me and he's like, these guys are so hopped up on sugar, right? They're gonna start seeing sound soon, right? But it's like their perspective was they see the world differently than I do, right? I'm like, we've got Saturday to worry about, right? 1 o'clock, we take the field with the Tri-City Bulldogs. We've got to not be bad. We got to be great. We got to work hard. We got to be ready to go. And they're all, there's Sundays over there, right? And they see the world so differently than I do. They see they see the instant moment, they see the gratification of this moment. And you always pretend like when you get older, you're like, well, I plan, I don't give in to those things. But then you're like, it'd be kind of cool to be able to just go, ice cream, again, right? Throw off your helmet, not even care where your helmet is.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you get to be an adult, you're like stacking everything. Hold on, I'm gonna go get dessert. But when you're a little kid, it's like I've got kids who show up to football games without their knee pads. Now you would think leaving the home, better make sure I have knee pads. Show up without their but they're just so into the next moment. They don't think anything of it. Get in the car becomes the only thing they're thinking about. Like they're not going, well, Mom, have you packed everything? Should I go through it just to check? Right? And it's like, because they're living in this moment and they're seeing the world differently. And I think sometimes when we look at people who see the world differently, we don't value it. I think we see it as, you're immature, you're a little child. And we sort of end up with like this idea that everyone who disagrees with us has kind of become our enemy. Right? That everyone who disagrees with us is bad. Everyone who sees the world differently than us is wrong. Anyone who values something that we see as questionable becomes the enemy. Anyone who, like I said, in our politics, we a lot of times hate the name on the back a little too often. I despise that person. Okay, do you know that person? And I'm challenged on this all the time. That I've got guys that I have and I always feel bad that I have to say this, but I've got great coaches I work with. We've got 28 coaches, I guess, that I oversee, and a lot of them look like they've been a little rough. They got tattoos up one arm, tattoos down the other. Some of them don't say the nicest things, right? A lot of them have lived pretty tough. A lot of them, they have flat-billed hats turned to the side. They got shorts that go to their ankles, which I tend to refer to as pants. But they're always wearing red. They're wearing, and it's like everybody's like, I'm like, actually, and I always feel bad I have to say this. I'm like, he's an awesome guy, super good guy. Because I have to like alleviate this concern these parents have. Like, I'm like, he's actually a super good guy. You should go get to know him. Super nice guy. I wouldn't let him out here if he wasn't. I don't know. And I always feel bad I have to say that, but it's like we make these assumptions based on what we see. All of a sudden the narrative becomes what we know, and suddenly, like what Paul is trying to stop them from doing, which is making people the enemy and not the philosophies and or the decisions of them. So he says, I am talking to you Gentiles. So now he's kind of redirecting. Now he's going back to the Gentiles. He says, in as much, which is still one of the great words that should be used consistently in today's language. In as much as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. I may arouse some people to envy. Right? This idea that you look at what somebody else has and you're like, envy isn't one of the sins, I thought. Isn't that in there? And here Paul's using that sin as a value, right? Live so well as to make other people jealous. Have a relationship in your home that is so fantastic it makes others jealous. Have a relationship with your kids that is so awesome it makes other people jealous. Now we don't talk like that in church, right? Because we don't jealousy, that's bad. But Paul's saying, listen, make people go, man, I wish I had what you had. Then you can go, really? Well, let me help you get there. Live so well, be so successful, be so great at what you do that it makes other people jealous. Winning breeds winning, right? And expectation. One of my favorite truths is winning breeds success, and we love success, but the problem with success is now it breeds expectation. And one of the reasons that we don't like to deal with those things is because we don't want to be what Paul says, which is probably the greatest he kind of challenged to himself and the world as he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Most of us would never, ever in a billion years say that. Because the minute you say it, oops, imitate me now. Let's forget what just happened 2 minutes ago. Last night, I yelled at some referees. I actually told one of them he was atrocious and should never be on a field again. I'm pretty sure Jesus would have said the same thing. If I was seen when I saw him. No, it was bad. It was bad. I told him I called him off the field. I said, it had nothing to do with my game. I was just young. You know, we all fall down. We all make mistakes. We all get frustrated. You know, we all stumble. And we would never say, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Because the reality is, when I say, imitate me as I imitate Christ, I'm laying that out there. Sometimes we look, and we all want to win, right? But the problem is that winning breeds this expectation to where people expect you now to continue as so forever. You know, I mean, that's why I still laugh at what Belichick said after the Super Bowl, right? When they said, how excited are you about winning the Super Bowl? What's your plans? And he said, well, I'm already 2 weeks behind on next season. Right? Probably my favorite coach's quote of all time. Because he's like, you know, it's great that we won the Super Bowl. Pretty excited the Super Bowl put us behind for next year. Like, most of us would be like, enjoy the moment, Bill. Get yourself a little linguiça, you know, get yourself something fun to eat, go have a good time. You know, and yes, was he being somewhat, you know, was he using some hyperbole? Yes. But I guarantee he had people on his coaching staff already preparing for next year while he was preparing for the Super Bowl. And we look at that and we just go, why on earth? Because it breeds expectation. You know, and he has this meteoric rise to success. Well, he wants to keep it. And the problem is for us, like when we're in good relationships, we're in good marriages, we have great relationships with our kids, you know, it's all great. But you can't turn your back on it for a second. You know, I mean, I remember I was talking to my in-laws years ago when Marcus was still, you know, an obnoxious little kid as opposed to the fantastic, wonderful teenager you are today. And they're like, you guys got lucky. Marcus is a great kid. And I was like, okay. I feel more pressure that I have a great kid because I want to keep him that way. Which means I'm not going to take my eye off the ball, right? Which I'm sure he appreciates that I'm always on it. It's our thing, you know. But it's like you know, it's important, you know. And it's nice to be able to look at it and go, yeah, it's great. We got lucky. High five, right? Because let's be honest, when they're that's luck of the draw. But we want to keep them that way, which means we're not going to take our eye off of that for even a second. You know, poor kid does not go a single day without instruction. I'm being honest. I don't think he goes a single day without me giving him some life lesson. You know, Dad, this is horrible. What can we learn from this? And he's like, nothing. Shut up. Right? I'm sure he feels that way in his heart. And I'm like, you know, like the other day we were talking about losing. You know, he's suffering through one of his toughest years. I think as an athlete right now. Well, toughest seasons, not years. You know, toughest seasons as an athlete. And you know, he's like, I'm tired of this. And I was like, yeah, but you're learning an important lesson. And he's like, losing? And I went, no, any idiot can lose. It takes zero talent or knowledge to lose. Any moron can lose. You're learning for the first time in your life how to play meaningless games. Every football game he's ever played mattered until this year. Now he's got some games that just don't matter. And I said, you're learning how to go out there and give your best even when there's maybe not a reward on the end of this for your team. You know, and he's like, great, that's cool, Dad. Can I get dinner? You know, I don't think that lesson sunk in. But, you know, that's the attitude is it's fantastic. It's awesome. You want to continue to push those expectations of winning and success. But at the same time, it's hard. It's hard. If you have a relationship for the ages, how many relationships for the ages end very badly? Almost all of them. right? Because we get so caught up and we go, we're just going to enjoy this season of winning, except that you're already 2 weeks behind on next year. You're 2 weeks behind on the year after that. Now you're 5 weeks behind on next year. Now you're a year behind on next year. And now you're in trouble. But that's what Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And so losing breeds complacency and habits. Losing is the greatest habit in the world. You know, I don't know how people feel about, Ben Shapiro, but he made a great point on money, where he said, no one in this country who's born into poverty stays in poverty because they have to. He said, you stay in poverty because you're bad with money. And I remember everybody's like, oh, you're so horrible, but he's right. In the end, losing is a habit. Failure is a habit. So he says, if for their rejection, so now he says, listen, if the Jews for their rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So if they can have all this success from losing, think about now all the success they could have from winning. How much greater would the world be if the Jews were brought to repentance and acceptance of Christ? Think about that. How much greater would the world be if the Jews jumped in with the Christians? Infinitely different, right?
Yes.
But see, in this case, sometimes I think it's easy to kind of wish ill, right, on those who oppress or those who think differently. But how much better would it be if we didn't have that attitude? How much better would it be? And Paul's trying to make sure that they understand, listen, you're going to have Jews that come into your ranks. You're going to have Jews that come into your world. How much better would it be if you could embrace them in? And think about what we could do together. Think about what we could do together. Think about the world if you took all the people in your life that disagree with your social and political philosophies. What if you listened to them? What if you heard what they had to say? What if you joined with them and said, you know what, listen, I know that we may disagree, but we are way better together. We haven't had a political candidate like that in my lifetime that I know. Because it's too important to stick to your principles that really have nothing to do with what you believe, only to do with what it takes to get the votes you need. But what if we took away this idea that it's friends and enemies, right? If we took the old, Godfather approach, right? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer. Yesterday, before our first game of the day, we had this one parent who's really boisterous and he's caused a lot of heartache. It causes a lot of issues. So he walks down on the field before the game and he goes, hey, listen, he and I get along all right. It's just, he riles up the whole crowd. He riles up all the parents and calls them all the time and tells them how bad things are. He walks up to me before the game and he goes, and this is in front of a small group of people, and he goes, hey, I don't know anything about football, but can I coach with you next year? And I was like, absolutely. Love to have you. Shook his hand. He goes, yeah, because I said, I'll teach you everything you need to know. That's it, really. Just a couple things that matter, right? Turns around, walks away. The first person next to me goes, what are you doing? I said, well, he's not in the crowd anymore. The reality is following more of the Abe Lincoln's approach, right? I destroy my enemies when I make them my friends. You destroy your enemies when you make them your friends. The problem is that we don't genuinely make them our friends. We may offer a gesture, a handshake, a little across the aisle high five, but we don't actually make them our friends. Because it's hard. Because you know what they're going to do? They're going to say something one time that burns. Right? It's your soul on fire. And you're like, and now you got to back off. Because you never say anything like that to them. That's the beauty of the situation, right? The reality is Paul is saying, make your enemies your friends. They've oppressed you, right? The Jews have oppressed the Gentiles. They have not been nice to them, okay? And then he said, bring them in. Bring them in. That's what I long for. I want them to be so envious of what we have that they come in and they want part of it. And he says, take your enemies and embrace them and pull them tight. Except that it doesn't mean just give them an olive branch gesture. That's worthless. We've seen plenty of political bipartisan decisions made that are worthless, right? Worthless. Not even worth the paper that they've signed it on. But what happens when you have a friendship with somebody that just burns at you? You know, what happens if you take somebody that you just wholeheartedly disagree with and make them your friend? Like I said, I don't mean just saying hi to them. That's not friendship. I've got lots of people that start talking to me and I'm like, I hope there's no reason in this conversation for me to know your name. Because we've talked enough that we're past the point of me asking. Right? But no, but I can't remember what your name is. I have plenty of those people. That's not friendship. The friendship is bringing people into that circle where you can listen to what they have to say, whether you disagree with it or not, and work through it. And sometimes they're going to say things and you know what your response should be? Nothing. They're going to say things that you disagree with, and the best response is nothing. And it's hard. It's hard. Because of my affiliation in these other organizations, I deal with it all the time. I mean, I have good friends that I've been friends with for years, and every now and then something about the way they feel about whatever slips out, and I think, wait, what? I had no idea. And it's surprising. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you all have those kind of relationships with people where maybe you've known them for years and all of a sudden, whoa, and you're like, wow. You did not just say that. Because that means there's no way you can be a Christian. Because that makes you a liberal. Right? I mean, we've all had that feeling, right? I've had people who, I have friends that I've been friends with for so long, care about people, and they come out with the most closed-minded values on things. And I think to myself, how do you balance, I guess I have some of those too. So then Paul says, if the part of the dough offered as the first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. If the root is holy, so are the branches. Now this is where it gets interesting to us. If some of the branches have been broken off, and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in amongst the others, and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior to the other branches. If you do, consider this: you don't support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I could be grafted in. So you've been grafted, which is a blessing because you would have died ultimately otherwise. You would have never produced fruit. One of my favorite things is avocados, right? If you take the avocado seed, right, throw it in the ground, you're gonna get an avocado tree, but what's it gonna be missing? Avocados. Right? Come on, we've all grown a little avocado in the cup at least at one point in the kitchen, right? Nobody?
No.
Right? Put little toothpicks and you put it in there. You people need to get a life. It is so much fun watching you go, and you're like, right? Tired of looking at the stupid thing in the window. You won't get avocados. Now you might, there are times, I guess, supposedly, that you can't get lucky, but you actually have to graft in part of an actual fruit-producing avocado tree into that avocado sprout in order for you to ever get avocados. No, it was very sad because I love avocados. I had no idea, right? So you've been grafted. Ultimately, you would have died because you would never produce fruit. You would have shot up and you would have died off. And so he says, you have this. So sometimes we think we're the center of the story and that we're really the reason for all of this, right? Sometimes we get really caught up in ourselves as the center of the narrative, and it kind of drives what we feel and what we believe about things, and we miss out on really the truth of the story, which is the root provides the nourishment. That the branches, whether they break off, grafted in, grow naturally, are all upon the pleasure of the root. If the root was not there, the branches would be irrelevant. We're not the root. We're not the foundation. But we have this mentality, right, that we're the good guys and they are the bad guys. How many of you have ever had a time in your life where you looked at some kind of conflict you were having and went, you're like, I'm totally the bad guy? Pretty rare, though, compared to how many times you think you're the good guy, right? I would hope so. Because if you always think of yourself as the bad guy, I'm gonna make some changes to the way you act, because if you know you're a horrible person, then you know, you're using that as an excuse more than likely. But the reality is most of the time we look at what other people say and do and we think, I don't know how you could be so ignorant just to think that. No, I don't know, you're so ignorant in your head. I do a lot. Right? How many times you sit there and just go, what? What? I don't understand where you're coming from. And we have this idea that somehow as grafted branches, that we're the good guys. We're the you're welcome God folks. Right? Because without us, look at those Jews, they didn't do anything for you. And Paul kind of acknowledges that it's a good thing. He says, listen, granted, you've done well, right? You're grafted. He says, but they were broken off because of unbelief. You stand by faith. Faith is what's keeping you attached to the root. Don't be arrogant, but tremble. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Right? So he says, listen, I appreciate the fact that you know you're important, but if God didn't spare the natural branches because they rebelled, he has no intention of keeping you. I mean, this is Paul pretty much laying it out there. He says, listen, he's not going to hesitate to cut off the ones that aren't natural if he didn't keep the ones that were natural. Right? Spiritual superiority is a huge problem. It's a big problem. This idea that we have sort of our enemies of the church and our allies. He says, listen, we're better together, all of us. You know, regardless of how you believe socially, regardless of how you believe philosophically, we're better. You know, but God's not going to spare us just because we chose to. We're there. You know, Marcus has this buddy. Marcus is gone. He has this buddy who's interesting. Well, anyway, last year I was teaching in class, and you know, this kid, he's fine. He and Marcus get along great, but he likes to tell on Marcus. Like, that's been his thing. Like, do you know what your son said? Do you know what your son did? Do you know what? And finally, one day I looked at him in class and I said, "You understand he's my son, right?" And he goes, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Yeah, but you're trying to curry favor with me because you're doing the right things and you're accusing him of the wrong things? You're trying to curry favor with me. You're trying to win me over. You're trying to..." And I finally looked down and said, "I will always pick him. I don't care what he does over you. So stop." And I think sometimes when we look at God and we think to ourselves, you know, God, you're welcome. Paul says, listen, he didn't hesitate to check the natural branches for spiritual superiority, for disbelief, rebellion. Why do you think you get to walk through your life with spiritual disbelief, superiority, and rebellion and think at some point he's not going to lop you off too? Grace? That's how we do it, right? Well, the Jews got what they deserved. They were sinners. I have grace. And Paul says, yeah, that's not how God rolls. If he sees you in rebellion, he's not going to say, no, it's cool. He's going to cut you off too. You're no more special than the natural branches I lopped off earlier. And if anything, if he was willing to cut off his chosen people, if he was willing to cut off the people that he gave the law to, that he gave his story to, that he trusted his truth to, what makes you think you're so vital that he won't lop you off too? And listen, Paul's just making sure the Gentiles know where they're at. He's making sure to, let's go ahead and we're going to turn into the skid here before you guys lose control. We're going to correct and we're going to get rolling forward. But I think that's one of those things where we lose that sometimes. We lose that sometimes. We start to think that we are spiritually invincible because of grace. We start to think that the mercy will never end. You know, it's new every morning. Except that at some point in time, account comes due. And if we live our lives with this idea of sort of spiritual superiority, we will find ourselves getting cut off. Because in the end, what do we really believe in? We don't believe in God. We believe in the fact that we were important enough to God to be saved. And we start to make ourselves the center of the narrative, and we lose sight of the root. that we are just blessed to be grafted in. Because otherwise I'd be a wild olive root growing in the middle of the woods, useless to anybody. But because of God and the root and his love of me, I was able to get grafted in and I have a chance. And there's enough room on this vine for everybody. But it'll never be unity if it's always us and them. Always. Always. So, my encouragement to you this week is stepping back and saying, listen, we've got to be careful. When we start to think that we're the better option, God, it's better that I'm in here than that guy. That guy would be a terrible representation of you. You're lucky to have me, right? We forget that we're supposed to love our enemies and we're supposed to draw them in. It's one of the hardest things, is loving people who are constantly against you. It's one of the hardest things in the world. And we forget that we're better allied with our enemies. One of my favorite stories from history that never came to fruition was when they tried to assassinate Hitler. What they did before they attempted to assassinate Hitler was they contacted a general named Rommel. And they asked Rommel if we're able to, if we're successful in this assassination attempt, will you take control of Germany? And Rommel really wanted no part of this. But his response was, if we're successful, then we're all going to take on Russia. Because Rommel was convinced Russia was the greater enemy than anything that was going on in Europe at the time. And his leveraging point was, let's understand who the real enemy is here and quit dealing with this. And let's quit worrying about this and let's all focus our efforts this way. And that was kind of his negotiating tactic. And I think sometimes we lose sight of who the real enemy is. And we start to make it people. And it's important that we sort of step back and understand, because that ultimately is when we're what I consider spiritually selfish. So let's close in prayer. Hopefully you have a good understanding of kind of what the goal was. One thing I wanted to show is the very first verse for next week. Consider therefore the kindness and sternness of God. Spend some time this week considering how beautifully merciful God is and how truly angry he can be at what he sees. So, like I said, we're going to take kind of a different route moving forward the next couple of weeks in really the topic of our Sundays. It's going to be a little bit away from the book of Romans for the next month. So, so just kind of prepared. It's going to be a little different. So let's we're going to receive our offering and close in prayer. Father, we just thank you so much for this morning, God. I pray that we can be challenged to understand the importance of our enemies in this fight, God. That we can draw in those that we disagree with, draw in those that we see as an enemy, God, and embrace them, embrace what they believe, and hear them, and understand that we are more than our social, we are more than our political, we are more than our philosophical ideologies. That we are, your chosen people, whether we believe this or that, or have this belief, that belief, the way things should be done, or whatever. God, I pray that we can embrace all of the differences that make up who we are as humanity, and really come together with our enemies and point each other toward you, so that we can be stronger and perfect and better together, as your servant Paul tried to help the Gentiles in the Roman church understand. Pray your blessing over the offering this morning, God. I pray your blessing over each and every penny that comes in, Father, and thank you so much for the generosity of your people. In your name, amen.